All right,
There you go.
recording. All right. Looks like I've been doing this all our life.
That's right.
Well, welcome. Welcome everyone for our conversation, our live stream podcast on the study of racism and the American church. Just a little bit of history about this. I'm Pastor Oberkehr for the pastor of Trinity Lutheran Church here in New Holland, Pennsylvania, and this is Pastor Glenn Beard. He is a member of the congregation. He also works with Oberkehr as wearing many hats. A valuable right-hand guy there at Oberkehr. They wouldn't know what to do without him. And he's been kind enough to join us and wearing his Villanova tie and adding some class to this broadcast. Just a little history of what we're talking about. Pastor Beard talked to me about doing a study, The Color of Compromise. Let me see if I could get this here. The Color of Compromise. It is by Jamar Tisby, and it is titled The Truth About the American Church's Complicity in Racism. Very heavy topic, and one that we've been studying in at Trinity here for our Lenten devotions, having a Zoom study, and I think it's been going really well. But I just wanted to ask Pastor Beard, since he was the instigator in this. If it wasn't for Pastor Beard doing this, it wouldn't have happened. And I just wanted to ask, what led you, Glenn, to this study of The Color of Compromise, the truth about racism and the complicity of the American church? What prompted you to bring this and want to study this and bring it to us?
Well, I'll tell you, the events of this past year and a half, maybe even longer, I think have weighed heavily on my heart and mind. I think the killing of George Floyd and the kind of the movement to begin the Black Lives Matter movement really inspired me to want to do something. And you mentioned my role here at Oberkehr. Oberkehr has 3 senior living communities, a very sensitive population to the COVID-19 virus, and so the pandemic made my involvement in some of the more public kinds of things happening with regard to the Black Lives Matter movement more difficult. I think that some of the people with whom I work, including myself, would have seen my being involved in public demonstrations and large crowds and things like that kind of reckless, given my responsibilities to care for seniors here. And so I didn't really feel like that was an option for me. And so I just have always remembered, my wife and I have been members of Trinity since the time I became a hospice chaplain and left the parish. That's going on 20 years ago almost. I've always enjoyed leading adult conversations on Sunday mornings during our Sunday school hour at Trinity. And so I just kind of stumbled upon the book, The Color of Compromise, and realized that it had a study guide and a DVD for each chapter. And I thought this would really be something that'd be worth studying together with a group of people where we kind of can be honest with one another and ask open questions and kind of do some self-examination and that sort of thing. And that was really why I brought it to you, to see if that would be something we could do. I had thought maybe on a Sunday morning, and you suggested that we begin with a kind of a Lenten theme, and I think it really fits into that well, even though it's going to go through the Easter season. But I think that was kind of my motivation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and how do you think it's been going so far? We've had what, four sessions, and
this week will be our 5th session. I think it's gone well. I think there are people in the class who clearly have learned something. One of the participants who's been there every week is also one of my disaster volunteers, and we've been traveling together doing some disaster response work kind of concurrently as we've been doing this study. And so we kind of have a built-in hour and a half as we're traveling to kind of do some review of where things have been and how the classes are going and that sort of thing. And he mentioned that it felt kind of like a history class for him in some respects, and I think in a lot of ways it is. But one of the things I think that it has shown is that what we've learned, particularly about slavery, about the founding generation of our country, probably wasn't all inclusive in school. That there are aspects of the way our Black and brown brothers and sisters were treated that wasn't a clear indication in the classes that we were a part of. So I think it's been helpful in that way. I think there were aspects of the last few centuries that many of us didn't know about, redlining and the fact that when the greatest generation came home from World War II, soldiers who fought were treated really well with regard to college and the GI Bill and things like that, as long as they looked like you and I. But if they had pigment in their skin, that wasn't an opportunity. And so there's a lot of unfortunate realities that I don't know everybody was aware of before.
Right. Well, yeah, I think that's right. We've kind of have there was a TV host I was listening to the other day, and it was kind of like talking about why do we need Black History Month? Why in the world do we need that? And it said, would be nice if we had White History Month. I mean, to learn all this stuff that was just never so we're all kind of living in this invisible web of policies and laws that are beneficial to one group and not to another, and it's all kind of invisible. We're not even aware of it. So it becomes easy to say, well, if they just pulled their bootstraps up, and you got to have boots in order to have bootstraps, and then the second thing, of course, is all of this stuff is invisible. So you think you've done something on your own, but like you throw the ball and the wind is behind you blowing at 50 miles an hour, and the ball really carries, and say, wow, look how far I threw that. And then you turn around and try to throw it the other way, and it doesn't go very far at all, but because the wind is that invisible. And that's one thing that I'm getting from the study, from what you're doing. Why do you think he's talking about when he says the color of compromise? What exactly do you think he means? I've looked at that, and I don't know exactly, so far what he's talking about. What is the compromise?
Well, I mean, he's specifically talking about the white church, and one of the statements he makes early on in the book and in the DVD series is that there really wouldn't be a Black church if it wasn't for the fact that the Black community didn't find welcome in the church, in the white church, and so I think at every opportunity where decisions were being made with regard to inclusion and equality, equity, equal rights for everyone. Even in the church, decisions were made to be exclusive, and that's something that sitting today in the 21st century, we sit and say, how is that possible? And in many respects, because we haven't really done a whole lot to change it, it's still happening. An example, back in the 1600s, there's still a plaque in historic Williamsburg where the church made the decision that baptism would be extended to slaves and to their families. But it was made clear that they should recognize that sacrament only had an impact on their soul. It didn't in any way imply that freedom, which we proclaim in the sacrament of baptism, means bodily freedom, that they still had that responsibility to their owner, regardless of whether they were baptized or not. And so to twist and contort something as beautiful as the sacrament of the church, in order to maintain that kind of socioeconomic relationship or whatever. It's just horrible. And I guess I am naive enough to think that it would have been possible that the church wouldn't have done something like that. So I think that's part of the obviously he doesn't specifically define the phrase, the color of compromise, but he's referring to the church specifically, and clearly the white church, and the fact that at almost every turn, there has been opportunity for making a change, and he talks about contingency. The fact that you can choose this way or that way, and having made the wrong choice, we're left with the circumstances that we have. So.
Yeah, I remember the part of the study that you're talking about, where they said, I think he phrased it in a really eloquent kind of way, when he said, this only applies to your soul. Your body belongs to us.
Right.
Still.
Right.
And, I wonder how that, because of that dichotomy, where we talk about our faith, we talk about the Christian religion, and especially here, we talk about separation of church and state. But we kind of relegate that's kind of taken the morality question out of that, like what you're talking about. How could the sacrament be changed like that? And we've taken the morality question out of the state, and we've located it solely. The church has only the afterlife to think about, the soul to think about,
right.
and the soul and the morality of what happens here, those things don't intermingle. So it kind of, in order to survive, the preaching of that separation of church and state gets, you can preach all you want about the hereafter, but don't bring, the way we live in the world now. Don't bring politics, so to speak, into discussion. Did you get that an awful lot when in your preaching? You say you're preaching politics, you're bringing politics into this, and because we still have that sense that that the church should not be involved, bringing to bear the moral questions in a society. You're over here. You're supposed to be talking about only the kingdom of heaven after what comes next. So
I'm sure there were times where I was criticized for saying something that might have stepped on a few toes regarding political views and that sort of thing. But gosh, especially in the Lutheran Church, we actually have an advocacy arm. I serve on the policy council for LAMPA, which is the Lutheran Advocacy Ministry in Pennsylvania. And there are a number of issues there that are clearly human justice issues that we're constantly trying to advocate for. And that's tough work. I can guarantee you, we're blessed that we have folks who are willing to do that work. I was involved in a few days of advocacy back in 2019, and yeah. You could always tell who it was that agreed with what you were thinking and who didn't. And if you had the blessing of 2 minutes with an elected official, you were you felt pretty good about that opportunity. But it's tough, and so many of these issues, because it involves money, obviously, are issues that people recoil against. Making sure that there isn't any food insecurity. Gosh, that should be such a simple thing, and unfortunately, the people who are most adversely affected by most issues are the ones who are most adversely affected by food insecurity and whatever else. And I think we continue to allow the fact that most people who look like us seem to be doing okay to kind of govern how we make decisions, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's Yeah, it's a complicated thing, and I've heard many times, and people are always saying, "Don't cross over that line." There's wherever that line is, and don't cross over the line into speaking about
Yeah.
the real world. You can talk all you want about, about the afterlife and about heaven and what's coming next, and that's kind of a bargain. It seems like that I realized, when this study that's bargain was struck a long time ago, before any of us really got here,
Yeah,
uh,
exactly.
and that's something to keep in mind always. You know, one of the things that when in looking at, did you have any reservation about bringing? I mean, New Holland is a fairly homogeneous community. It's mostly a white community. Probably, if you look at of people of color and minorities, I mean, the Amish probably outnumber them. It's did you
Yeah.
have any thought about that in when you thought about doing this?
Well, I kind of knew that it wasn't going to be an easy study, and so far, some of the historical stuff that we've looked at has sort of been not quite benign, but it hasn't been quite as challenging, I guess, is the word to say, as some of the things that we're going to continue to look at. But I grew up in Denver, in Lancaster County here, and I think there were 182 people in my high school graduation class, and every one of us was white. It wasn't until I went away to college where I had opportunity to be in classes with people of color, with to share a communal shower situation in a dormitory with people of color, to march in a marching band, with people of color, whatever, and really began to recognize that not a whole lot of difference between us, even though I was kind of raised in a way where I was sort of encouraged to be careful. And I tell the story often of my one grandfather who was born in the late 1800s, who always gave me money when my aunt would take me and my cousin to the shore, and then say, "Watch out for the boogies." And that was the term he used for black people. And I never really understood why. My grandfather was a cattle hauler and a road supervisor and a farmer. Probably left Lancaster County less times than you can count on both hands. And so probably just out of a lack of experience, ignorance due to a lack of experience, he had the kind of perception that he had. And I remember one fall, my uncle took me to a Phillies game, and it was camera night at Vet Stadium, and walking down the steps to the field where you had the opportunity to walk around and take pictures with the ball players. And a young black kid came running up the steps and stole my camera and got away. And I was never able to take one single picture. And I just kind of remember that night on the way home feeling really upset, worried about whether or not my mom was going to be really mad at me for having had her camera stolen, but feeling like maybe that's what my grandfather was talking about, that's why I need to be afraid or wary or cautious or whatever. And unfortunately, it's been life experiences, not a great deal. I certainly don't feel like I have a plethora of experience interacting with all of God's children, but I think in some respects I recognize that my own attitudes and own perceptions need to change, constantly need to be reformed, and that there's a lot of beauty and opportunity out there as we seek to get to know people who don't necessarily look and think the way we do. So those are some of the opportunities I sought in leading this conversation.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, you shared that story with the group. It was really it sets a great tone. I like the way you interject that. It keeps the conversation and the discussion real. And I think it illustrates for me, because I'm hearing a lot of things, coming up in the study just like that. It's I haven't had a lot of experience. I haven't had a lot of, and And in some ways, I served as a pastor of an African American Hispanic church in New York City when I came before coming here. And one of the things that I almost assumed, just that now that now that I'm back in a homogenous community, that all of those issues, you don't deal with them now because they're not relevant. They're only relevant there. And it took me, even coming here, it took me a while to realize that this is the place they're most relevant, because most of those issues that we're talking about, like you had, what struck me about your story is that here was your grandfather who loved you, and that love was unquestioning, gave you a gift, that money, the $5, whatever it is, and with that gift came a message,
Mhm.
and the message, and now and then life confirmed the message for you. The light bulb goes on.
Right.
Okay, now I know what he was talking about. And many of us don't get any farther than that. We don't progress any further than that. We have, okay, I got the message was confirmed, now this is what I believe. And it's to your credit and all of our credit that you continue to work through that and recognize, wait a minute, that's not the whole story. There's more to the story. And one of the things that I think that I'm coming up, we almost have the same kind of feeling here, that we're all a homogenous church. These issues don't apply to us. They're not relevant to us. And because of what we talked about at the beginning, if I'm playing catch, I remember playing catch out in the field when I was a kid, on the ball field when I was a kid growing up. And if I have that analogy again, if I have the wind at my back and it's 50 miles an hour and the wind is at my back and I'm throwing the ball to somebody who's on the other end, he catches the ball, but the wind now is against him 50 miles an hour and he's
Mhm.
trying to throw the ball. And I'm thinking over here, man, what an arm I've got. This is real. Let that thing fly. And then look, and then you see the ball coming back and it's coming back and he's putting twice as much effort and getting half the result. And that's, to me, it seems that that's kind of the way we've all lived. We've lived with a 50-mile-an-hour wind at our back. We don't give it any thought. You don't give it any. It's just taken for granted, and we're just standing there admiring our prowess at how well this is doing. And then we don't recognize that the people that we're partnering with have that 50-mile-an-hour wind, which is invisible, in their face, and they're throwing against it, and we're throwing with it.
Right.
And that's kind of so the biggest thing, for us, I think, and for me personally, is to become aware of that situation, because it's easy to forget the wind. When you're down at the beach or you're down somewhere where the wind is blowing, it's at your back, it's easy to forget it. It's not bothering you. It almost disappears into the background. But when you turn around and and you're heading into that wind, then suddenly you realize, just what's going on and just what you're up against. And I guess that's kind of that was a growth in my thinking, and even in your bringing this, because I realize at this point that all of us in the white church and in the white community, and I have experience going back and forth, need to be aware of how that wind has been favoring us for such a long time. And the conversation has to begin in our community, in the white community. It can't start in the African American community. It can't start in the Hispanic community. It has to begin with us. Um, and when I talked about compromise, it struck me the last time, our last session, was that a compromise is always going to be made. And the question isn't whether or not you're going to compromise. The question is what you're going to compromise. And for the sin, I guess, of the white church has been that it chose to compromise the message of the gospel. How can you see and claim the divinity, the God in all of us, which is what Paul talks about, which is what Jesus was ministry was about. How can you claim that and yet live in a system that denies that with every breath?
Right.
And so what we have done, the compromise, and when you talk about the color of compromise, I would say what the white church has done and is to compromise that gospel message in order to excel and to live in a world that lives contrary to that message every single day.
Right. Yeah, and I think really understanding where that compromise began, or some of the kind of key decisions that led to that. I mean, we have denominations here in the United States that only exist because of racist issues that the church faced, and the way in which the church dealt with that compromise was to say, okay, we'll start our own church. I mean, gosh, we have examples of that all over the place. In the Lutheran Church, especially, there are places where congregations exist because they started worshiping in English, for crying out loud, and the original church only ever worshipped in German. And so they built a new church because of that. But it's unbelievable when you stop and think that some denominations only exist because there were some who refused to allow Black and brown people to be a part of their church, even to the extent that in part of their protest, if you will, they said that there's just an inferior sense about African Americans, and therefore they couldn't possibly relate to the white church.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredibly sad that was part of our history, but it certainly was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and it continues to be a part of our history, and in one that we need to struggle with and to reconcile with. What does that mean? Um, and it's not an easy question. It's going to be one that we're going to be struggling with for a long time, one way or another. That's not going to be solved in any short term kind of time frame. Probably not our lifetime, but for me, I said this a little bit on Sunday. It's to me, what kind of world are we looking to leave leave to our kids behind us? What kind of a world, if we don't begin this conversation? It's been going on before I was born. And I think that's what this study is showing, how long this has been going on. This is deep.
Yeah.
Deep in the DNA. It's deep in our psyche. It's deep in the structure of how we have designed our lives together. We call it a culture. We call it community. We call it a nation. We call it constitution. Whatever you want to call it. It is deep. And I guess the first thing to do with this is always to become aware. Is become aware of how this is affecting, how this is happening. Become aware of the story that wasn't told. And then to make those decisions. That's where contingency for me comes into that. Now, when you are aware, now decide. Now that it's one thing to make an unconscious decision on things that you take for granted, like you and your grandfather. You made the unconscious decision. Grandfather was right. Lost my camera. Now I got to go home and see my mother. And who needs this?
Right.
Unconscious decision. Now I make my decision about, and I formulate my world around that, around all of these unconscious things. But then as you bring them to the forefront, then you become conscious. Like you remember your grandfather, you remember that, you remember the love you felt, and you remember the message that came with it. And now that in awareness, now I am free now to make, now that you're aware, choose. Now formulate your world. And you begin, that's what growth is, right?
Right.
That's when we begin to grow. And to me, I think the study becomes important, and it becomes important for us, and in a white church, in a white congregation, to become and to bring this to the awareness, to begin to ask questions, and then to begin to formulate our world. One of the things that I have done is, when I was working in call in New York, we talked about how to make a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multicultural, multilingual congregation, because I had Caribbean blacks, American blacks. We had people from El Salvador, Nicaragua. We had Costa Rica. You name
Everywhere.
it.
Yeah.
I had guys from Haiti. We had like and a girl from Poland. So we had all sorts of things. And you begin when you start to do that. You begin. There's a whole series of steps, and we get to the point where we think the goal is assimilation. You know, where we're going to assimilate into one thing. And usually that means the dominant culture and the underculture, the people that are coming in, minority culture, are going to figure out a way how to assimilate to the dominant culture. And that's a recipe for failure, because that never works. The churches that went all the way and became successful in that assimilation and that multicultural expression were the ones who recognized and figured out how to reinvent themselves, how to recreate themselves, their identity, their stories, and how to retell their story with a brand new focus. I guess
Hmm.
use a biblical thing as Jesus says, "Don't put new wine into old skins." And you almost, and I think that's underneath all of that, because I've heard a lot of discussions. I think that's the next step that we really have to begin to move out of. How do we get past the idea that people are going to assimilate into what we do, and because what we do is so wonderful, and then to help us recreate and reinvent who we are, and to tell a new story about our ministry, tell a new story about our identity as children of God, and not as whatever identities we've been holding on to. And
Well,
that's
I think that that's a question that the church in general, mainline church especially, has to answer with regard to. I mean, even if the only thing we were talking about was the way in which we worship, or, or pipe organ and whatever else, or whatever. I mean, I think to assume that to be church, we have to be a specific thing is really a recipe, like you said, for failure. And to try to determine how the church looks and feels and acts going forward, I think that's probably a question that's open ended. There isn't a clear answer to that. It's constantly evolving and changing in order to be able to reach everybody that needs to be reached. So yeah.
yeah
That's the
that
nice thing about this study. As I think about it, I mean, we're a third of the way through. There are 12 sessions. We've had 4, and what do I think we will look like and be after we're done? I don't have a clue. I'm hoping that it will be something that continues to spur conversation, continues to kind of influence our thinking and decision making and all of that kind of stuff. But beyond that, there's where we trust the Spirit to work, and hope that
yeah
we're in tune with the Spirit. So anyway.
yeah this whole enterprise is kind of like those cartoons with the guys walking around and the girders going back and forth, and he's blindfolded, he's walking in his sleep, and just when they step out into space, another thing steps on, and that's kind of
Right.
what
It comes up.
this whole thing is like. But yeah, I think there's some good possibilities, and helping us keep this in the forefront and not let it fall down, and finding ways to to take this new awareness and to begin to actually develop conversations and discussions within our community, and developing new relationships. One of the things just say that I have found uh, so enlightening, I guess, is just the recognition of how many people of color are really here among us in our community, in our communities here. Um, I noticed that I live on Main Street here in New Holland, and across the parking lot, there's apartments across the our neighbors, and there's Puerto Rican families, there's Costa Rican family, there's, you know, there's all, and then there's one guy that was flying a Confederate flag. You know what, we are in a, I guess our communities are changing, uh,
Yeah.
and they're growing, and if we, I guess I'm thankful for this color of compromise, that ever since I said yes and so let's do this, and I was so grateful for you to introduce this to us. I've been more sensitive and more aware that when I go and I'm walking the dogs out and past a biracial couple, you know, a white man and a black woman, two doors down, that just moved in,
Hmm.
it's the kids. And I say, you know, so it's almost like the Holy Spirit's at work here, and I'm not sure exactly either what the next steps are going to be, but I think there's some places that I'd like to see us begin to develop new relationships, and to begin to put some of these things in practice, so that we begin some healing and some transformation, because I think we're all in desperate need of that transformation.
For sure. Absolutely.
Len, thank you for spending some time with us today, and maybe
Sure.
we'll figure on doing this again as we get further on in the study. It's nice to be able to unpack some of those things, and not to dominate the discussion, because we have so many people there to dominate the discussion with our stuff, but to listen. I figured that between the two of us, what do we have, like 50 years of ministerial
Yeah,
experience?
that's right.
So I
Yeah.
guess we got something to say about this.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and you know, if folks are watching and want to tune in, how can they find out how to get on with us? Is that something that's on the church's webpage or?
Yeah. What they can do is, on our Facebook Live page, I post the newsletter, so you can go on there and follow the newsletter, and all of the links are there, so that if you want to join the discussion, the Zoom link is there for the Facebook Live for the week, for every week. You can go there and pick that up. And I would suggest that you subscribe to our newsletter, and then you won't worry about missing a thing. We put all the entire calendar of the week of all the Zoom discussions and all the Zoom groups on there. So everyone is welcome and everyone is invited, and I'm getting a lot out of it, and I think you probably will too if you join us.
That'd be great.
All right, Glenn, thank you. Thanks for the discussion, the conversation, and look forward to maybe doing this again.
Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah, you too. We'll see you on Wednesday.
All right. Let's see.